Hi everyone. Hello. Can you all hear me? Hello. Thank you for coming. I appreciate this is the end of a very busy day and I'm stopping you from getting to happy hour and data night out, so I do appreciate you being here. So my name's Emma Whyte, and in the session today we're going to be having a look at working with survey data. We're going to go all the way through from prepping it in Tableau Prep to analysing it in Tableau Desktop. So a quick show of hands, who works with survey data already? Quite a few people. Cool. Who's used Tableau Prep before? Okay, a few hands as well. Excellent. So yeah, we're going to do the whole flow today, all the way through. So my name's Emma Whyte, and I'll just introduce myself a little bit more in a second as well. So here's the agenda for today. First of all, we're going to have a little look at the survey data that I collected for this talk. That's probably the steps that you're going to go through as well when you're working with new survey data. So we're going to understand what the survey is and what the questions are. We're going to look at different types of questions as well. So I'm going to look at 3 main question types today. And then we're going to have a look at understanding the data that sits underneath those questions. So we're having a look at all the data and all the responses. We're then going to have a look at the structure of that data, how to clean it and shape it in Tableau Prep, ready to analyse in Tableau Desktop. So to try and make it as easy as possible when we're in Desktop. So a little bit about me. So I've been using Tableau since around 2012. I started out in version 6. I was previously a data analyst working with survey data. We did that in Excel and SPSS. It was awful. It basically consisted of exporting survey data from online survey tools into Excel. We had, for each different survey, we had a massive Excel workbook, and we had to copy and paste stuff into it every month. We created some fantastic pie charts and bar charts in there. And then we also did some analysis in SPSS as well. And then we would copy and paste all of those images and all of those charts into a Word document, make it a PDF, and email it to everyone. And that happened every month. And I kind of thought there must be a better way of doing this. There must be a way to automate this and just make it a lot easier. So that's when I started trying out loads of different BI softwares, and I found Tableau, and I never really looked back. In 2013, I joined the Information Lab, who's a Tableau partner. You might have seen us downstairs, as a Tableau consultant. I also qualified as a Tableau trainer, and I've done the desktop and server certifications as well. And in this year, I became a Tableau Zen Master, which is pretty cool. Thank you. And in case you are wondering, yes, I am pregnant. I have 6 weeks, so hopefully no surprises today. Okay, so moving on, let's get to know the survey that we're going to have a look at today. So hopefully, I'm going to look at 3 main question types. They're found in like 90% of the surveys that you see. And hopefully it resonates with the data that you're working with as well. Okay, so the first question type, I apologize, that is a little bit small, but have you used Tableau Prep yet? So this is a single select question. So the respondent can only select one of those answers. Quite a common question type. The next one is a multiple select question. So the respondent can select as many options as they wish from that question, so they can select 3 or 4 or 1 or 2. And the third question type is going to be a Likert score, which is usually a ranking between 1 and 5 or 1 and 7 or 0 and 10 if you're looking at a Net Promoter Score. So they're the 3 main question types that we're going to look at today. Each of those question types stores the data differently underneath. So we need to understand the data for each of those question types so we know how to work with it as well. So here's an example of the data for a single select. It's usually stored in one column, and each row is an individual respondent. And I'm going to show you in a minute, there's usually two ways of exporting data in a survey tool. So you can export the text responses, and you can export the number responses as well. So this is an example of text responses. So if it's a yes-no question, then it will say yes or no, depending on what they've ticked. For the multiple selects, they're usually stored across many columns. So you'll have as many columns as you have options in that multiple select question. So you can see in this, again, we have one row per respondent. Where they've ticked the box, it's filled in that cell with text. And where they haven't ticked the box, that is left null or empty. And this is an example of a Likert score. A Likert score question, again, has one column. And if it's a text response, it'll give you kind of the label to the number that they've selected. But when I show you the number responses, you'll see that the number goes in there. Okay. So this is what the data kind of ends up like. It ends up really, really wide. So we usually have a respondent ID or some way of identifying the person who's responded. It will usually have a date time field, so when they've submitted the survey. And then you'll get lots and lots of columns. You might have things like demographic data in there, so you know the person's gender and age group and things like that. But you'll also get a column for each question or many columns for each question, depending on what question types you've got in there. So it ends up really, really wide. I'm going to flip to Excel to show you the data. I promise this is the only Excel I'm going to show you today. Okay, so this is an example of when the data is exported as numbers. So I've kind of color-coded the different question types to explain it. But we have one row per respondent. We have a column for the questions. Some questions have many columns. So if it's a single select, that's the kind of blue color. The single selects are also coded, so a person's name might be 1, and the next option will be 2. So we have those coded in as well. But what we really want the number responses for are the Likert score questions and the multiple select questions. So for the Likert score questions, obviously if they've ticked 5, it puts a 5 in the cell. If they've ticked 1, it puts 1 in the cell. And if we look at the multiple select, you'll get a 1 where they've ticked the option, but it leaves it empty if they haven't ticked it. And I will flip over to the text response. Format's exactly the same. You get one row per respondent, and instead of it being coded as numbers, it's coded as text. Okay. I'll quickly show you the questionnaire. So I put this together for this talk. I then shared it on Twitter and got people to fill it in. So if anyone filled it in, thank you. So it had lots of different question types in here. So it had the 3 main ones. So the single select, have you used Tableau Prep yet? Things like, have you been to a conference, Tableau conference before? And then we had the multiple select was what are your favorite new features in Tableau Desktop? And obviously, who's your favorite European Tableau Zen master is one we all want to know. And we have some Likert score questions in here as well. Okay, so that's just a rough guide to the questionnaire. Okay, so that's what our data is currently looking like. Very, very wide, lots of columns. Actually, that's not the best for analysing in Tableau. You could connect Tableau straight up to that data, but you'd find it really difficult to work with. So what you actually need to do is transform that data or pivot it, so rather than being really, really wide, be really, really tall. And this is kind of a general rule for all data in Tableau. So whether it's finance data, so with finance, sometimes you get a column for each month or year. Actually, what Tableau works best with is rather than really, really wide data, really, really tall data. So this is the kind of output that we're looking for when we put it through Tableau Prep. So you'll see, you might be able to see, the respondent ID is actually duplicated. So I have many rows for each respondent now. So this is respondent ID 2, and then it goes the question number next to it. So for as many questions as we have, or as many columns as we have in our data, that respondent ID gets duplicated for each question. So that's the output that we're looking for from Tableau Prep. Okay, so let's prep some data. This is where we do live demos and things can go wrong, but hopefully everything goes okay. So I'm really just going to scratch the surface of Tableau Prep today. If you would like to learn more about Tableau Prep, there are obviously other sessions at the conference. But when you open Tableau Prep, I'm going to point you to the right-hand side of the screen. Tableau have put tons of training videos on the website, so definitely go and watch those to find out a little bit more about the product. Tableau Prep only shipped in April this year, so it only came to market in April. It is a standalone product from Tableau Desktop. And it's going to have more and more features as we have more and more releases. And if you watch the keynote this afternoon, then you know that they're actually going to have monthly releases, so monthly updates from now on. So it's going to change really quick. What I really like about Tableau Prep is if you use Tableau Desktop, it's a really similar interface. A lot of the things look exactly the same. So if you're used to desktop, you'll find Prep really easy to learn. So on the left-hand side of the screen, when you open Prep, you'll have like the data connections bar, where you can add data connections into Tableau Prep. In the middle of the screen, much like desktop, where you get your recent workbooks, you have your recent flows. And on the right-hand side, you have all of the training videos and some blog posts and stuff like that, which are great resources. So I'm going to connect to data. And it opens up the connection window. So this is the list of the connections at the moment, but again, this is going to expand over time. I'm using Excel today, so I'm going to connect to Microsoft Excel, and I'm going to work with these, the two workbooks, so the text results and the code results. We're going to clean them up, we're going to join them together, and then we're going to output it to Tableau Desktop. So I'll bring in the text results first. Let that think about it. Okay, so when I bring a data source into Tableau Prep, it kind of divides the screen up a little bit. So at the very top of the screen, that's where the flow is going to be built, and you'll see that build out as we add steps. And at the bottom half of the screen, you'll be able to either see the rows of data or a summary of the data. So let me just add a step. That actually adds a cleaning step. You can do loads of different things in here. But I just want to show you the interface. So the first interface we have underneath is like the summary view. And if you saw the keynote, then it kind of gives you some really key information about the data that you're looking at. It gives you kind of a chart for each of the fields. So if you're looking at dates, then it'll, like this bar is telling me when most of my surveys were completed. I can then look at different questions and see the most answers. And if I click an option, then it actually kind of shows me where all the other data sits for those people who tick that answer. I can also flip to a grid view, so this is what you're probably used to seeing in Tableau Desktop when you're working with data connections. So I can actually see the row by row data in here as well. So whatever step that I'm kind of doing in prep, I can always go back and see what's happened to the data. Okay. So the first thing I notice about this data set is I've actually got two header rows. So Tableau's picked up the top header row from Excel, which is actually things like the question ID, so Q0, Q1, Q2, Q3. And then underneath that, I actually have the question text. That's not really what I want. So I'm just going to right-click and exclude, and that's going to exclude any record IDs that are null. When I make a change to my data, it tracks it in the changes pane on the left-hand side. So if you ever need to go back and see what changes you've made, you can do that. What Tableau did in the background was it actually wrote a calculation for me. See if I can zoom that in. So it actually wrote a calculation in the background. It saved me writing it. Did that by just automatically for me. And if I want to remove a step, I can remove that step at any time. But let's leave it excluded. Okay, so I've got rid of that extra header row at the top. Now what I want to do is I want to do that transformation to make it from very, very wide to very, very tall. So what we do is we add a pivot step. So I'm going to pivot the data. So you maybe saw this in the keynote again this afternoon. What I want to do is for every question in the survey, I want to have a row for that question. So I'm going to select all of my question columns. So there are some that I want to leave as columns. So the record ID I want to leave as a column, and things like that. So let's add these fields over to my pivot. And you can see that on the right-hand side, what Tableau has done, I can actually move these around as well, so that would be handy. Let's move that there. So for each record ID, I now have a row for each of the questions that I've added to the pivot. And it's given it some generic names, so let's just rename that. So pivot 1 names is actually my question ID. And the values, I'm going to call these my text responses. Okay. I'm going to do exactly the same steps now with the coded responses. So let me add another data source. So these are my coded results. I'm going to add that cleaning step. I'm going to remove that double header row again. And then I'm going to add the pivot. And I'm going to again select all of my questions. Drag them into the pivot and again rename the fields. I'm going to call this one my value response because that is where it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so if I just add a quick step in here, it's easy to see the data. So what I've done is I've kind of made the data from being very, very wide to very, very tall by doing that pivot. So I now have many fewer columns, but I have many more rows. Let me just remove that step. So what I want to do now is I want to join these two data sets together because I only want to work with one data set in Tableau, in desktop. So the easiest way to do that is actually just to drag one onto the other. And a bit like Tableau desktop, you have the option to do join or union. So I'll do a join. And this join window is actually my favorite part of Tableau Prep. I quite often struggle with joins. I don't know if anyone else does. But it makes it really easy to understand what's going on. So on the left-hand side at the bottom, I've got my join clauses. So these are the fields that I'm actually joining on. So Tableau's picked up that in both data sets, I have a record ID, so it's joined on those automatically. And what you'll also notice, it uses some clever colouring coding as well. So I had one data stream that was all blue and one that was kind of all that orangey yellow. And it's carried that through into the join window as well, so I know where my data is coming from into my join. So record ID is fine. I do need to join on record ID, but I also need to join on my question ID. The reason I need to join on my question ID is because for each respondent, for each question, I need to make sure that I align the text response and the number response correctly. Okay? I can change the join type if I need to, so I can make it left, right, full out to join by just clicking on the Venn diagram. But actually, inner join is what I want. And then really cleverly underneath, it's summarised my join results. So in this case, it all looks good. I had 3,825 records from both data sets, and the result, the green bar, is the same number. So I've correctly joined all of my rows. I'm going to have a mismatch join in a minute, and I'll show you how that's displayed. Okay, cool. So I've got all of my responses there. But if I go back to the data here, do you remember I had the double header row? So I actually had the question text in there as well. That's actually useful to have in Tableau Desktop. You can use it in titles. You can use it to filter down to particular questions without having to remember, oh, question ID 1 is this question. So I'm going to go and add a branch. So for each data input, I don't have to bring it in again to do different steps. I can just add a branch and it's going to do different things to that same data set. So this time, rather than excluding that very first row, I'm going to keep only that row. Okay, so I've kept only that very first row. So I've got question IDs going across, and then I've got the question text underneath. If you don't have that in your data set, you could quite easily create that in Excel. But usually you can export the question text as well. And I'm going to add a pivot, and this time I'm going to pivot everything. So I'm going to select all my columns and pivot everything. So this is my question ID, and this is my question text this time. Okay. Oh, timestamp. Timestamp. There we go. Drag that in. Okay. So I now have a result. If I show you quickly, I have two columns now. One is all my question IDs and one is all my question text. So let me remove that. I'm going to bring that in to my other data set and do another new join. It's picked out question ID as my join clause over here. But this time I have some issues. So it's missing 5 rows from the very top flow. And if I click that, I can actually see what rows are being excluded. These are being excluded because they're still columns in my original data set. So I'm not really worried about that. That's fine. But you can see the interface allows you to spot where your joins aren't quite right. So let's add a step. And I just want to start tidying things up. So when I've been joining things together, I now have multiple columns of the same thing. So question ID, for example, is now in here like 3 times. So I'm just going to remove all the duplicates. Let's go back to this view and remove the field. And I'll do the same with all of my duplicates. So I'm just making the data set as easy and tidy to work with in desktop as possible. So get rid of all these duplicates where it's got a hyphen and then a number. So let's remove those. Okay, that's looking good. And now I'm also going to have a look at the data types. So question text is coming through as text. It's got an ABC there. But my value response isn't. It's recognizing as text for some reason. So I can just convert that in here to a whole number. And I'll just go through and make sure everything else is okay. That looks good. Question 0 is actually the person's location or their city. So I'll rename that to city. And that's all looking really good. There's one other thing that I like to do with the survey data. I like to group my questions as well. So if you've got a survey that's got a ton of questions in it, you can group them for various reasons. So you might have like different sections of the survey, so you want to group questions into different sections. But I like to group them by question type. And then I can use that grouping as a filter in Tableau just to narrow down the data that I'm looking at. So I'm just going to, first of all, I need to duplicate my question text field. Unfortunately, there's no very easy way to do that in Prep yet, but they know about it. So I actually need to create a calculated field from the question text field. And I'm just going to call this my question grouping. And all that's in that calculation is the question text field. It's just going to duplicate the text. So I'll save it. So that's my duplicate of the question text field. And now I can start grouping these into different types of questions. So there's group and replace. I'm going to use a manual selection, but there's also some really cool algorithms to do it by pronunciation or common characters you could have a look at. So I'll do a manual selection, and I want to group all of my multi-select questions together and all of my Likert score questions together. So I'm just going to go and do that really quickly. So if I select one option, so one of the members of the field in the left, I can then start grouping them by using the tick boxes. So I'm just finding all of the features in 2018.1. And I should have 5 when I'm finished. Yep, 5 members. Okay, so all of the members that I've ticked on the right-hand side are going to be grouped together. And then whatever the group name is will appear in Tableau Desktop. So I'm going to make this a little bit more readable and call these multi-select. I can type. And I'm going to do the same with my look at score questions. So let's find all of those. So these are all the foods, people rating different foods that they like or don't like, or drinks as well. There we go. Okay, and let's rename this to be my Likert score. When I rename it, it actually puts it into the tick boxes on the right-hand side. It's got a red dot by it, and it's telling me that there's no value that matches that in the data set. That's actually really useful. If you know that the data is going to change, or you might add new values into that field, if it matches what you've typed in there in future, it will be put into that group. That's something you can't do in desktop at the moment, so that's quite cool. Okay, I am now done in prep. So I've prepped all of my data, and I can output it to different files. So at the moment, like I said, prep's still early in its stages, so I can save it as a file. And the options I have include Hyper, TD, and CSV. So Hyper and TD I can obviously open in desktop. CSV I could open in anything else. But I could also publish it as a data source to Tableau Server or Tableau Online. At the moment we can't schedule these, but that is going to come in the future as well. Or, if you're like me, you'll just do straight into a preview in Tableau Desktop. And you can do this from any step. So if you really want to check that you've done the right thing, you can go and preview in Desktop. So preview in Tableau Desktop. What it does, it creates a hyper file, and then it opens Tableau Desktop for you. Let me format the workbook, so I'm going to bump up the font size so you can all see it. Okay, so what I'm going to do in desktop is I'm going to create a visualization for each of the question types, just as an example of how you might visualize it. And then I'm going to go and create a quick dashboard to show you how you might create an interactive dashboard with survey data as well. But I do have another workbook that's got lots of other ideas about how you can visualize survey data. So I'll make sure that I share that with you on Twitter and things like that afterwards as well. Okay, so let's have a look at a single select question first. So I'm a big sheet namer, so single select. Let's use that question text field, and I'm going to filter down just to a single question. So the question we've been looking at is, have you used Tableau Prep yet? So I'll tick that one, press OK. Now, if we want to count the number of respondents, we have to remember that we've duplicated the rows in our data. So if I just bring out number of records, oops, let's put record ID there. Number of records. Now, tell me that's gone right, because I should have many more than that. Okay. What it should do is be a much higher number. So normally when you work with survey data and you've multiplied it out, what you should do is create a number of respondents which counts distinct the respondent ID. So let's call it number of respondents. I'm hoping that the data's come through okay. Count distinct respondent ID. Sorry, record ID. Press OK. Yeah, 255. Okay, so I've got 255 respondents. I just realized I have a filter. So if I bring out number of records without the filter, I have 3,825 rows in my data. Okay. But actually, that is not the number of respondents because I've multiplied it out. So if you want to use the correct number of respondents, you have to create this calculation, which is the count distinct of record ID. Okay. So I have 255 respondents for this question, and if I bring in this onto columns, so I get a bar chart instead. Bring in my text responses, so my text response gives me whether it was like yes, no, or don't know. Let's sort that. So now I can just see the number of respondents for the different options for the question. But with survey data, we always want to look at the percentages as well. So let's bring number of respondents, let's copy that. So I'm going to hold Command or Control if you're on Windows. Drop it onto label. And I'm going to apply a quick table calculation, percent of total. Let me just format that so it's a bit easier to read. So 61% of people that responded had tried Tableau Prep, which is cool. So I like this view because although it's a simple bar chart, it's telling me two things about the data. It's telling me the percentage of respondents that ticked the different options, but it's also still giving me the axis at the bottom, which actually tells me the number of respondents who've answered the question, because you always want to look out in survey data for questions where maybe like 20 people have answered, because that's not going to give you a broad spectrum. Okay, let's delete that one. So let's move on to a multi-select question. So this is where the question grouping comes in handy. So because we had many columns for them, one multiple select had many columns. So grouping all of those options together allows me to see all of the answers to that multiple select question in one view. So question grouping onto filter, tick multi-select, bring in my number of respondents, and bring in my text responses. Let's make that as big as possible. I'll exclude those nulls. And I'll sort the data. So I can see that for this question, so the question was in 2018.1, what's your favorite new feature, or what are your favorite new features? High Vis and Tooltip worksheets came out top. If we want to do a percentage of these people, we have to remember that you can tick more than one option. So just doing a quick table calculation isn't going to work here. We have to write a calculation. So if I do create calculate field, I'm going to call this a multi-select percent. And what we want to do is we actually want to use that value response. If we remember back to the value data for the multiple select, if they ticked the box, then they got a 1 in the data. So I want to count or sum up all of those ones. So let's do a sum of the value response. So that's going to tell me, it's going to give me a 1 for every person that answered that option. And I need to divide that by the total number of respondents, so by that 255. The best way to make sure that always happens is to use an LOD. So to fix it for the entire data set, bring me back my number of respondents. And I'm going to need to sum that up as well, just to make sure my calculation works. Okay, so I'll just make that a little bit bigger. So you can see. So that is how to create a multi-select percent, and I'll show you the differences in the percentages in a second. So let me just format that first, because otherwise it's going to look weird. So I'll make it a percentage. There we go. Pop it onto label. Okay, so you can see that our percentages add up to more than 100%, and that's because the respondent can tick more than one option. So that's why we had to write that calculation. But we can see that most people really liked the Hide the Vis and Tooltip worksheets and the step and jump lights. The last view I'm going to create really quickly is for the Likert score questions. Again, that question grouping comes into handy because I'll just filter down to all of the Likert score questions. We want to have a look at the number of respondents again by the different questions. Okay, so I can see that there's 255 respondents for each of those Likert score questions. What I need to do is break that down by the different options. So if I bring in text responses onto colour, it's going to look a bit garish to start with. I'll exclude those nulls. We've now broken that bar down into the different options that you have for the question. So do you like haggis? Most people are saying yuck. No, don't like it. But actually seeing that as a percentage is much more useful. So again, we go back to our handy table calculation. So I'm going to add a table calculation. And we're going to do the percent of total. But we need to make sure that we do it just by that text response field. So it's trying to tell you what it's doing, but each row here, each bar should add up to 100%. And Tableau is trying to tell us it's doing that because it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across the bar. Okay? So now I can see that about 46% of people said yuck to do they like haggis. So let's fix these colours. I'm just going to reorder them first. So I'll put the worst one at the top, then the next one, and so there we go. And then I'm going to edit the colours, and I always like to use kind of a divergent colour palette on these, so let me assign the palette. So the reason I ordered them was then when I assign the palette, the I love it gets the dark blue and the yuck gets the light blue. It's a little trick for you there. And then if you don't like that order of the bar, because I always like to go, well, it should read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across the screen, then you can just again reorder them all. Okay, and we can obviously pop the percentage on the label, format that. I really wish it would just automate to no decimal places. And then if we're showing the labels on the bars, we don't have to show the header. And we get a nice way of visualizing who's ticked what option there. The other way of looking at Likert score data is to look at the average of the scores as well. And that's why we brought in those number responses as part of the data. So let me just do that. Let me just duplicate this. And let me bring in the value response. If I bring it in, it's going to sum it, so I'll change it to an average, because we want to look at the average score. Looks a bit weird, but that's because I've got some colours and some weird labels on there. So I can see that the highest average score is for strawberries and cream, the lowest is for haggis. But I like to kind of merge these two bits of information together. So what I like to do is make it a dual axis chart. So I'll make it a dual axis, and we'll put these back 2 bars. And we'll leave that a circle, but we'll bump the size up so they're big enough. And a little bit of formatting. So for our axes, Tableau always goes from 0, but our scores don't go from 0 for the average, they go from 1 to 5. So we want to edit that and make sure we fix the axis between 1 and 5. Obviously, it's never going to go beyond those values. And I just want to double check that this axis is always going from 0 to 1 to make sure that they kind of line up. What I'll do is I'm going to hide the value response header. I'm going to take off the percentage labels because they're kind of overlapping everything a bit. And instead I'm going to show you the labels for the average. Let's just do a little bit of formatting to make that a little bit nicer. So I'll center them and align them and format to 1 decimal place. Much better. Okay, so now we can see, not only can we see the proportion of the different people, or the distribution of people that tick the different responses, but we can also easily see which one has the lowest average score and which one has the highest average score. It's quite a popular way of looking at Likert score data. Okay, so now we're going to look at the question that I know everyone's here to see. Who is everyone's favourite European Zen master? So, the big reveal. Let's filter down to that question. I wish more of them were in the room. So, sorry? I know the answer, yeah. It's very funny. So, who's your favourite European Tableau Zen master was the question. These are all of the different responses. So these are all of our European Zen masters. I'm excluding Craig Bloodworth and Andy Kriebel because they're now Hall of Fame Zens. They've had enough fame. So I'll exclude them from the survey. Okay, so these are all the options. And let's bring in number of respondents and find out. Oh. Now, thank you. This might be a bit biased because I sent out the survey. And I did 12 responses. And you did 12, yeah. Brilliant. This is Neil Richards for here. There we go. Okay, so let's add a percentage onto that. So let's do our quick table calculation, percent of total. It wasn't multiple choice, so that's all right. So let me format that so it looks a little bit nicer. Nope, no percentage. Okay. What we often want to do with our survey data is, I mean, this is just looking at everyone as a whole, but we often have like demographic data in here as well. So we might know something about our customer who's answered this survey or the person who's filled it in, like we might know their gender or their age group or where they're from, like what region or country they're from. We might even segment them. So we might segment them into different groups. So I'm going to build a dashboard that allows you to kind of interact and see where these responses differ between different groups of people. Let me just name this. I can't abide sheet 5. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this. And what I want to do is I want to work out, well, for different genders vote for different Zen masters? That's the question that I want to answer. So I'm going to bring gender onto columns. And that gives me a bit of a split, but it's really hard to kind of compare all of that. So I'm going to instead rank the different Zen masters for the different genders. So let me just do a quick table calculation. So I'm going to do a rank unique on the number of respondents. I'll make it discrete. So rather than giving me an axis, it gives me a label. Let's drag text responses to detail, and I'll just compute that using the text responses. So that means I'm ranking my Zen masters. So the first one for female may be different to the men. Okay? It becomes more obvious when I build a quick dashboard. So I'll put that one at the top, that one at the bottom. What I haven't shown you yet is with the question text, it's also really helpful. You can just insert it into your title, so you don't have to keep typing everything out. Let's hide those. Let's get rid of that title. Let's hide that so we can see it. Let's change the resolution. Bit better. What I want to be able to do is click on a Zen master's name at the top and see where they rank at the bottom. So that is a dashboard action. So dashboard, actions, add action. I'm going to highlight them. So from the first sheet to the second one on a text response, press OK. Let's make this nice and big. Okay, so if I click my name, I can see that I rank pretty evenly between men and women. Let's have a look at Neil. Fairly evenly, slightly more with males than females. Really wish Chris Love was in the room, because when I hit Chris Love is a big hit with the ladies. So hopefully this gives you some ideas about how you can start analysing your survey data, how you can prepare it in Tableau Prep, how you can bring it into Tableau Desktop and start making some really interesting interactive visualizations, which is what Tableau is all about really, is making it interactive so people can ask and answer their own questions. Just to finish up, there's also some great resources out there. I learned a lot of stuff that I already know about survey data from Steve Wexler. So in 2012, when I was learning Tableau and working with survey data, his materials were invaluable to me. He's also a Zen Master, and I do recommend that you go and have a look at his website. I've got a blog, and I do blogs sometimes about survey data. And there's also a video, a Think Data Thursday, which Tableau runs, which Steve Wexler has done, so you can actually watch him kind of explaining how he works with survey data as well. So that's some additional resources there. But other than that, I'll open the floor up to questions. Okay, let me give you a microphone. Thank you. Oh, I don't know if it's working. I might have to turn it up for you.
Yeah, it's not Mike.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for the talk. That was very useful. Simple question. When you have null and null string, you want to bring those two together, but it doesn't seem as though there's any way of entering null into Tableau Prep.
To say actually null as a string?
So to say that it is actually null, that should be null. So there's some null strings, that's the messy bit of the data, but it should actually be null. But it doesn't seem to be a way of entering null when you're trying to bring those two together.
So there will be ways around that. So you could always write a calculation to say like if null, then some text.
Messy though.
It's not clean and simple. What I would suggest is, you know, the Tableau Ideas forum?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'd put that on there and then they'll pick it up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Over here? Pass it this way. Thank you.
Thanks for a really interesting talk. I've got two questions. The first one is, if you have survey response data that's pre-comments, is there any way of using Tableau Prep to break down the comments into like common words?
Yeah. So the question, I'm not sure if the microphone's working, so the question was, if you have free text fields, how can you analyze that? And how can you break that down in Tableau Prep? So what I've done in the past is you basically have to kind of break out every word into a row. And you could do that. You could do like, I don't know, you could split it by space or something like that, and then pivot the data. That's going to end up being really, really huge. And then obviously you've got to find a way of, I don't know if you do like sentiment analysis. If you do sentiment analysis, maybe you want to find out if something is positive or negative. So you could do that by like joining it to like a dictionary of words where you class it as positive or negative. Actually, the best tool that I find for doing that is a tool called Alteryx. And if you come to the information lab downstairs, then we can give you a demo of that. And I've got some blogs on that as well. So Alteryx actually has some really clever sentiment analysis using the Cortana engine. So Cortana, obviously, we have on Microsoft phones and we talk into it. They actually collect that data and they use it for figuring out what's a positive phrase, what's a negative phrase. And you can actually then push fields of text, so you don't even have to break it out into each individual word. You can push it into the Cortana engine. It analyzes it and it gives you a score back between 1 and 10. So 10 being positive, 1 being negative. So you can use that. Yep. Yeah.
And that is a score of 1 maybe.
Yeah.
So it kind of confuses people. I don't know if there's any way around that.
Yeah, so if I go back to that particular viz, so the question was, for the Likert scores, this one, so like 2.2 kind of falls into like the yuck proportion, which you might class as a 1. The only way around it really is to play around with the axis, which is really tricky. So I would say if you're really focused on that, maybe have the average bar next to it, rather than on top of the Likert score. Yeah, just slightly different way of visualizing it. Yeah, I would think would be the answer. Cool. Okay, one over here as well. Are you sure? Okay.
So just very technical about Tableau Prep. Tableau extracts into Tableau Prep? Because I couldn't find the
Can you bring Tableau extracts into Tableau Prep? So if we have a look at the connections, there is Tableau extract in there. Server, no, not yet.
You know what? Is that a plan? I mean, that's,
I'm not entirely sure. I know some things that are on the roadmap, but not. I would assume it is. That would be.
you've got bits of data in
Yeah.
different extracts you want to join it together. It's perfect tool to do it. You can't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't do it at the moment, but I imagine it would be on the roadmap. But again, one for the ideas forum. But I'll feed that back as well. Okay, any other questions? Do you want to shout? Okay, try it. It is working. Should the light be on or off? Or the light should be off.
No? Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
What are you doing in case you have quite difficult, or you have multiple questions and you want to find out the interaction between the question? For example, I want to know, okay, the ones who have voted for Emma Whyte, what did they answer on the multiple other questions? And especially if you have 20 questions, it's not easy to put them on one dashboard. How do you figure out there the the interactions between those questions?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I guess same with anything in Tableau, you can't fit everything onto one dashboard, right? So what I always suggest to people to do is think about using dashboard actions. So if I click on something in this dashboard, does it take me to another one and filter down to like that subset of people, but then show me the other responses to their other questions? So you kind of have to think in advance, okay, I need to show this, this and this, so I need to plan out what these actions will be and where they will take me.
So kind of explore the data first before providing a dashboard, maybe to the executive, for example.
Yeah, I mean, you could iterate so quickly in Tableau, just keep iterating until you get where you need to. And the thing is with Tableau Desktop, it's never really a finished report. It's always, always changing. Yeah. Is that time to leave? There we go. Anyone else? So there's a lady at the back, and then I'll come to this side. You can pass it. Perfect.
Hi. Don't necessarily tell me how if it's long, but could you tell me where to Google? Because when I've Googled, I can find it. But in SPSS, when you've weighted it up, not in a Likert score,
Yeah.
but just from a sample to a population size, how do you apply that weight when it's to like a worded
so you've got,
question?
have you got a column that says weight?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what you would do is, if it's difficult for a Likert score question, you might multiply it.
Well, yeah, it's not a Likert score. So I know for a Likert score, you just multiply, but when
Yeah.
it's just X many people have said
Yeah.
Y and said...
Use the weight
Yeah.
rather than the number response.
Okay.
Use the weight field instead. I don't have one, otherwise I would show you,
Right.
but I might have one if you want to
Okay.
come afterwards, and I'll show you.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I just couldn't find when I was Googling.
Yeah, no worries. So we'll come to this side of the room. There's a lady at the back here. Oh, thank you. I'll come to you in a minute. I think the light should be off.
Does it work? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the problem that we are mainly having is that we have several studies in many countries in many years, and every single year in every country the question is slightly changing, the question key is changing, and the answer is changing. So sometimes it's yes, no, the other year it's definitely a never, and we kind of have to match it to actually see how it developed over years. And currently we're doing it with configuration fields that we are just uploading to the database, which is a lot of effort, and yeah, everything is done manually. And would it be possible to there match like everything, like the key as well as the question as well as the answer, and then also telling them what it's supposed to be? And how much effort would that be, or is there a better way to do that?
Okay, so there is no easy answer to that question. So what you could do, I guess what you're trying to do is have like a master list. So you have like, in this year for this country, these are the questions they ask and these are the responses. I think that would be the best way to do it. There is a feature in Tableau Prep which I'm not really sure if it's going to help you or not, but I'll try and show you really quickly. So if your data is kind of like in the same structure, the column names might not be the same, but they still exist across the data sets. You can actually use a union, and then you can merge the fields together that don't match. I have a quick nap time, so let's do it. Don't save this. Actually, let's cancel that. Let's do a new one. Don't save. So I've got like 3 CSV files that they all have the same structure. And then I have a 4th CSV file that has a slightly different structure, slightly different names. So these are the 4 CSVs. So if I bring in one of them, what I can do is, for multiple files, I can do a wildcard union. So I can say that any file in there that has the word flight in it. And if I apply this, did it work? Okay, so it's trying to union all of those files together, and 4 isn't working. And that's because something is incompatible with the other files, which is usually like the names of the fields are different. I could bring that file in separately. So if I bring that in, and then I can try and union them together. And what Prep will do is it will show me the fields that don't match. So in this example, I have flight number and tail number, which it's got the yellow underneath, so I know it's coming from this file here. And the blue ones are coming from the other files, so I know that they're not quite right. We had this kind of demoed before as well in the keynote. So I'd have to bring tail number and match it up and drop it. And it's merging those fields together. It's kind of renaming them and doing all that. Again, it's a little bit manual. You'd have to like set up all those merges, and then every time you got like a new data file in, you'd have to double check it. So it might be a solution as one of the features, but I think you're probably doing it the right way by having like a master list and then joining to that. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? So are you trying to say like I had the question IDs as the header?
3 fields had the question.
Yeah. So where I had like respondent ID and then it said null, could I fill that in with respondent ID as well? You could, I think you can manually type in Prep to do that, to do a manual change, but then it might change all the nulls to that. So I would say no. There's no particularly easy way of doing it. Hopefully it'll come. Fill down would be good. Yeah, we might be able to do that, yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Appreciate it.